So Rachel Carson's book comes out. It was released in the United States, but really was a global hit. And it got people thinking, like, what are we doing to our environment? How are we affecting species? Now, even before this book, people were thinking about that, but this book kind of inspired that. And so one of the things that came out of it, and I would say kind of inspired, like this was already in the works when this book was released, was CITES. CITES, or the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. So, I know, that's a mouthful. I expect you to know what CITES is. But really focusing on this international trade of both fauna, which is animals, and flora, which is plants. And what CITES wanted, what its goal was to limit trade of species. Not just the animals themselves, but also species parts. What I mean by that are things like this. So here we have skins of, different tigers and jaguars. Here we have things that are made out of ivory, which is the tusk of an elephant. And what CITES did is put a lot of regulations on what could and could not be traded, whether it's the whole animal itself or an animal part. Now the reason animal parts matter is because depending on what part it is, more than likely it ends up in the death of that organism, which has caused a lot of extinctions and a lot of endangerment of animals, not because the animal themselves were killed because they needed the meat or something, but killed because, hey, I can make money off of it. And so these are some examples, but even things like herbs and medicines, so things that are harvested from the wild for herbal remedies, shark fins. So the goal of CITES was to halt, regulate, and enforce trade of different animals and animal parts, as well as plants too. Plants is actually most of what CITES covers. So CITES protects about 36,000 organisms worldwide, and although I'll focus a lot on animals because we're more familiar, not only with animals, but animal parts that we have heard of before and know there's issues of, but actually majority are plants. 30,000 of those 36,000 are plants. These could be plants that are cool looking, like orchids or Venus flytraps, that, people pick them because they're cool. It could be for herbs, it could be for wood for furniture. So there's actually a lot of plants, and then only about 6,000 animals. This is a worldwide treaty. About 181 countries have signed this treaty and agree to follow the provisions laid out in this treaty. Here in the United States, it's managed by Fish and Wildlife Service. This is the same organization that was also regulating our National Wildlife Refuge System. So again, their goal, looking at fish and wildlife, they don't have a huge emphasis on fish, it just happens to be what their name is, but they're really looking at plants and animals in the United States. So this is a treaty amongst all these countries in red, and these are countries that have said, yeah, I understand that we have plants and animals endangered around the world, and we want to do our part to kind of prevent their trade from encouraging them to go extinct. Now CITES is broken into 3 different parts. These parts are called appendices. Of all those 36,000 species, not all of them are critically endangered, which means not all of them need the same protections as one another. So these 3 appendices essentially have 3 different levels of protection, depending on how endangered that species actually is. So Appendix 1. Appendix 1 are species that are endangered, that are about to go extinct. And the main reason why they're going extinct is because of trade. So CITES is not looking at habitat destruction. It's not looking at things like that. It's looking specifically at trade. So for example, the jaguar. The jaguar is on Appendix 1 because it's going extinct, and one of the main reasons it's going extinct is because people are killing them for their fur. Elephants are listed on here. Elephants are going extinct because people are killing them for their ivory. So again, these are organisms that are going extinct, but they're going extinct due to trade. And because of this, there is a complete ban on trade of these whole organisms or these organism parts. So ivory cannot be traded from one country to another. Jaguar skins cannot be traded from one country to another. And you're like, well, just because they can't be doesn't mean they won't be. True, but if they're caught, you're talking about huge, incredible fines, and the, at least authorities in these countries, don't want them to be traded. You know, elephants being killed in both Asia and Africa, you know, you're not selling the ivory to someone within your country, right? They have access to the elephants too. They're trying to sell it out of the country, and this is what CITES is trying to stop. So again, there's about 1,000 species, so it's actually a very small appendix. These are species that are going extinct. We know they're going to extinct, and the reason they're going extinct is because of trade. For example, in the United States, we have an owl species that's going extinct. It's not listed on CITES because people aren't catching them and selling them worldwide. They're going extinct due to habitat destruction. So again, kind of looking at that as it's due to trade. So that's the first appendix and the strongest appendix. The next appendix, which is where 34,000 out of the 36,000 of species are on. These species can be traded. You can sell something you have here in the United States to someone in France. You can do that. It's just regulated, meaning that the Fish and Wildlife Service in the United States is keeping track. The French Fish and Wildlife Service, they're keeping track. Essentially what they're doing is making sure that you as an individual trading this organism is not really harming the environment. The species that are listed on this appendix are species that could potentially face issues because they're traded so much. So for example, Venus flytraps. People like them because they're cool, right? They don't grow everywhere in the world. They are native to the United States. You can find them down in the Carolinas. People trade them, and our issue is that, well, maybe if we just let them be traded and no one regulated it, it's possible they could start going extinct because, you know, they're traded so much. So we just kind of want to keep tabs on it, and that's it. Also, organisms used in the pet trade are also listed on Appendix 2. So for example, iguanas. We have a lot of iguanas in the environment, but we also trade a lot of iguanas for pets. We just want to keep track of, yes, we've taken 100 iguanas out of the environment this year to be traded to other countries. Let's just keep a mental note of that so that in 10 years and 20 and 50 years we can say, okay, we know this many iguanas have been traded. We're starting to see their populations start diminishing, so let's change these trade regulations to ensure that they don't get to the point like the jaguar or like the elephant. And again, this is because they are traded. This isn't just some random species that, oh, this woodpecker is losing its habitat. That's not on here. It's only on here if species are actually being traded. And then lastly, Appendix 3. This is the smallest appendix. This appendix also has the least amount of protections. Remember, this is a treaty between 181 countries. Some countries have organisms that they're trying to protect, but they actually don't know much about them. For example, in Costa Rica, this is the two-clawed sloth, and they want to make sure that they don't go extinct. But they also don't know much about the sloths in Costa Rica. They don't know if they have a lot or a little. They don't really know if people are taking them out of the country or not. So essentially what happens is Costa Rica says, hey, 180 other countries, if someone's trying to give you a sloth, can you just let us know about it? There's no regulations per se, but it's more of a just make sure nothing shady is going on. They don't have enough evidence yet to list it in either of the other appendices. So think of these 200 as if they get more information, they might be able to list it onto one of the other two. But in the meantime, Costa Rica is thinking, okay, I think something's going on, but we don't quite exactly know yet. Maybe in 5-10 years, you might see it listed on another appendix or delisted entirely. So again, CITES is a worldwide effort really focusing on the trade of these organisms.